I moved into my apartment about 4 years ago after a messy breakup and a job transfer that forced me halfway across the country. It was a quiet, mid-sized building on the edge of town. The kind of place that felt like it had been built in the 80s and never really updated since then. Beige walls, squeaky floors, a faint smell of paint in the halls. But it was affordable and decently maintained. I didn't mind the creaky floorboards or the old pipes that groaned at night. I actually kind of liked it. It felt lived in, familiar. My unit was on the second floor, one of 4 on that level. Above me was a single apartment, Unit 3B, which, according to the property manager, was currently vacant. The tenant who'd lived there before had left abruptly a few months earlier. No one seemed to know why. For the first few months, everything was normal. I worked long hours and usually came home after dark, made dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. The building was mostly quiet except for the occasional door closing or dog barking down the hall. Then one night around 11:30, I was getting ready to sleep when I heard footsteps above me. Not random creaks, but clear, deliberate footsteps. Slow, pacing back and forth. I froze for a second, listening. They kept going for maybe a minute, then stopped. I figured someone must have moved in upstairs and I just hadn't seen them yet. The next morning, when I went downstairs to check my mail, I ran into Mr. Green, the building manager. He was an older guy in his 60s who lived on site. I asked him casually if someone had taken the unit above me. He shook his head. Nope, still empty. Why, you hearing something? I laughed it off and said it was probably just the building settling. He shrugged and said old floors can make weird noises at night. That was fair enough, so I didn't think much more about it. But the sounds didn't stop. A few nights later, I heard them again. This time, it started around midnight and went on for almost half an hour, slow pacing at first. Then a few faster steps, like someone running a few feet before stopping. I even heard what sounded like something dragging, like furniture being shifted. It was unsettling because I knew no one was supposed to be there. The next day, I went outside and looked up at the windows of 3B. The blinds were shut, but I could see the faint outline of something hanging near the glass. Maybe curtains? Or maybe it was just a shadow. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. Maybe Green had let a contractor in to do some repairs. Maybe the sound was coming from somewhere else entirely and echoing through the walls. But deep down, I knew exactly where it was coming from. One Saturday, I was home all day working on my laptop, and around 3 in the afternoon, I heard it again. Footsteps. Not as heavy this time, but distinct. It made no sense. Green's office was closed that day, and I hadn't seen any vehicles in the lot, so I decided to go check. I walked upstairs and stood outside the door to 3B. Everything looked perfectly normal. The door was closed, and there was a thin layer of dust on the doorknob, like no one had touched it in weeks. I knocked once. No answer. I waited, then knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I leaned closer and thought I heard something faint, like someone moving quietly on the other side. I called out, "Hello? Maintenance?" but got no response. After a few seconds, the sound stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds before heading back down to my place. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise put me on edge. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to faint thumping again. It wasn't above me this time. It was somewhere near the far corner of my ceiling, almost like it was coming from inside the wall. I turned off my TV and listened. It would stop for a few minutes, then start again. 3 slow thuds, a pause, then another one. I remember sitting on my couch just staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. When I finally drifted off, it was near sunrise. A few days later, I caught Green outside again and told him about it. He seemed skeptical but said he'd check it out. He let himself into 3B that afternoon while I waited in the hallway. The place looked empty from what I could see. Bare floors, no furniture, no curtains. He said there was some dust and an old air mattress in one corner, but nothing else. No signs anyone had been there recently. Still, he changed the locks just in case. That night, I felt relieved. Maybe it really was just pipes or air ducts or something. That peace didn't last long. A week later, I came home late from work. around 1 a.m., and as I was fumbling with my keys, I heard movement above me again. It wasn't pacing this time. It was fast, almost frantic, like someone running in short bursts and then stopping. I just stood there in my living room staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. It went on for maybe a minute, then silence. Then, a few seconds later, something heavy hit the floor upstairs. It was so loud it rattled the light fixture above me. I grabbed my phone and called Green right away. He didn't answer. I almost called the cops, but then the sound stopped completely. Just silence. The next morning I went upstairs again. The door to 3B was still locked. Nothing looked out of place. I thought about asking Green to install a security camera in the hallway, but I didn't want to come across as paranoid. Instead, I decided to record the sounds myself. I set up my phone on my dresser before bed with a voice recorder app running. That night I heard nothing. The next night, nothing again. On the third night, though, I woke up around 4 a.m. and noticed the faint creaking sound again, soft but steady. The next morning I checked the recording. You could clearly hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate pacing right above me for nearly 10 minutes. Then silence. When I played the clip for Green later, he frowned but didn't say much. Could be the building shifting, he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. Or maybe an animal in the ceiling. But I'd been there long enough to know the difference between rats and human footsteps. After that, I started noticing other small things. My lights would flicker for a second when the noise started. Once, I came home to find a small pile of drywall dust near my window. Another time, my smoke detector went off in the middle of the night for no reason. I started feeling like the apartment itself didn't want me there. About 2 weeks later, I was coming up the stairs from the lobby when I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway outside 3B. It was a man, tall, thin, wearing a dark hoodie. He was facing the door like he was listening. I froze for a second, thinking maybe it was maintenance, but when I called out, "Hey!" he turned his head slightly and then walked away down the other end of the hall. I hurried up after him, but by the time I turned the corner, he was gone. No sound of footsteps, no door closing. Just gone. That night, the noises stopped completely. For the first time in weeks, everything was silent. I slept through the night without waking up once. The next morning, I went to leave for work, and something made me look up. The blinds in 3B were open for the first time. I could see into the window from the parking lot, and it looked like there was someone standing just inside, facing out. I blinked and they were gone. Maybe it was just the light, maybe my eyes playing tricks. I don't know. A few days later, Green slipped a notice under everyone's door. Apparently, someone had broken into the building's basement through a side window. He didn't go into detail, but I overheard one of the tenants say police found signs someone had been sleeping down there for weeks. Food wrappers, blankets, even some personal items. The cops thought maybe the person had been sneaking upstairs at night. When I asked Green about it, he said, "We think whoever it was found a way into the empty units now and then. Guess we scared them off." After that, I never heard the footsteps again. Still, sometimes late at night, I catch myself glancing at the ceiling and listening, just in case. Old buildings creak, I tell myself. Pipes expand, floors shift. That's all it ever was, just the building settling. But I moved out a few months later anyway. I used to work as a night security guard at a mid-rise apartment complex in a small city. It wasn't a bad gig. The pay was steady, the building was clean, and the residents were mostly quiet professionals who kept to themselves. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and mostly involved monitoring the CCTV feeds, logging any incidents, and doing the occasional patrol through the hallways and parking lot. It wasn't exciting, but I preferred that. The less excitement, the better. The building had 2 elevators that serviced all 8 floors, and both were monitored by cameras that streamed directly to the front desk. My workstation had a grid of 12 screens showing different areas: the lobby, hallways, laundry room, parking lot, and the elevators. I'd spend hours staring at those monitors, sipping bad coffee, half listening to the hum of the air conditioner. About 3 months into the job, I started noticing something strange during the quieter parts of the night. Around 2:30 a.m., give or take a few minutes, I'd sometimes see a woman enter the left elevator on the lobby camera. She looked to be in her 30s, average height, always wearing a long gray coat. She never looked toward the camera, just walked straight in, pressed a button, and stood there silently until the doors closed. The odd part was that I never saw her come out. Normally, after someone entered the elevator, I'd see the corresponding feed on the floor they exited to. It was part of our routine to note traffic patterns and identify loitering. But this woman? She'd enter the elevator on the ground floor, the doors would close, and that was it. No exit, no sign of her in the hallways. She just disappeared between floors. The first few times I figured maybe I'd missed it. Maybe she got off on a floor while I was checking another camera, or maybe the timing just didn't line up. But after seeing her 2 or 3 nights in a row, I started paying closer attention. The next night, I decided to track her movement in real time. Sure enough, around 2:27 a.m., she appeared again on the lobby feed. Same gray coat, same straight walk toward the elevator. I switched my focus to the interior camera as she stepped inside. She pressed one of the middle floor buttons, looked like the 4th or 5th, and stood perfectly still facing the door. The doors closed, the elevator started moving, and then the feed flickered for just a second. When it came back, the elevator was empty. No one had entered or exited. The doors hadn't opened. The timer on the footage showed no cut or jump. It was continuous. She was there one moment and gone the next. I replayed it several times to make sure it wasn't a glitch, but the timestamp didn't change. It didn't make sense. I logged the incident like I was supposed to, labeling it camera interference, and made a note to tell maintenance in the morning. The next night, I kept an eye on that feed again, and again, at roughly the same time, she appeared. Walked in, pressed the button, disappeared between floors. Same thing, same sequence. After about a week of this, I decided to check the building logs. We had a digital entry system where every resident's key fob recorded their entry and exit. Between 2 and 3 a.m. on those nights, not a single log entry matched her description. I even checked guest entries. Nothing. No one was using the lobby doors around that time. Now, I wasn't the type to jump to supernatural explanations. I've seen enough weird stuff on security duty, drunk residents, sleepwalkers, even kids sneaking around, that I usually found a logical reason for things, so I figured the camera must be malfunctioning. Maybe it was looping an old recording or ghosting images from another night. A few days later, during a maintenance round, I asked Luis, our building technician, to check the elevator feeds. I showed him the footage from one of the nights. He frowned and said it looked like the image buffer had ghosting, which happens when data from an older recording overlays the live feed. He told me he'd reset the system that evening and replace the storage card. That night I felt relieved, but at 2:31 a.m., like clockwork, the woman appeared again. Only this time she didn't go straight to the elevator. She stood in the lobby for a few seconds, facing the front desk camera. Her face was partially hidden by her hair, but it was clear enough that she was staring directly toward the lens. I remember feeling my stomach tighten as I stared back at her image on the screen. After a few seconds, she turned and walked into the elevator, same as before. The next morning, I showed Luis the footage again. He looked confused. "That's live," he said. "That's not a ghost recording. You can see your reflection in the background when she's standing there." He was right. I could see myself faintly in the monitor reflection behind the desk. This wasn't an overlay. It happened in real time. We checked the elevator logs together. Every time someone used the elevator, it registered wait data and floor stops. For her rides, the logs showed something strange. The elevator would register a weight increase when she entered, but when it reached the next floor, the system recorded it as empty, like someone had stepped off, even though the doors never opened. Luis said that was impossible, and that he'd need to run a diagnostic. A few nights later, I decided to investigate myself. Around 2:20 a.m., I positioned one of the movable cameras in the hallway outside the elevators to get a better view. Then I sat back and waited. At 2:29, she appeared again, walked through the lobby, same coat, same movement. The elevator doors opened. She stepped in, pressed the button, and the doors shut. I quickly switched to the new hallway camera feed to catch her exiting on the upper floors. Nothing. No doors opened on any level. I switched back to the lobby camera. The elevator doors opened again, empty. She had vanished. I was officially creeped out now. I started to question my own sanity. Maybe someone was sneaking in from a side entrance I wasn't watching. Or maybe she was a resident, and I just didn't recognize her from the photos in the database. I decided to check the tenant records for anyone matching her description. Nothing. Not a single resident in the building fit. About a week later, the property manager asked me to review footage from a tenant complaint. A woman on the 5th floor claimed someone had been knocking on her door late at night. She didn't see who it was, but said she'd heard footsteps and the elevator running around 2:30 a.m. I pulled up the feeds from that night. At 2:28, there she was again, the gray coat woman walking out of the elevator on the 5th floor. For the first time, the doors opened. She stepped out slowly and turned left down the hall. The tenant's apartment was at the very end. When she reached it, she stopped and stood there for nearly a full minute without moving. Then she turned around and went back toward the elevator. The doors opened again, she stepped in, and the feed cut out for 2 seconds. When it came back, the elevator was empty. I called the manager right away. We rewatched it together. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he told me that Unit 507, the tenant who D filed the complaint, had once been rented by a woman who D died there years ago. The new tenant had moved in recently, and her apartment layout was identical to the one the woman used to live in. I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but it was an eerie coincidence. The next few nights, I didn't see the woman again. I thought maybe whatever glitch or strange occurrence had been happening was over. Then, one night around 3 a.m., I was finishing my report when I heard the faint ding of the elevator from the lobby. I looked up at the monitor and froze. The elevator doors were open, but the car was empty. Still, the weight sensor showed 64 kilograms registered inside. Then, as I stared, the interior lights flickered once. A faint shadow crossed the back wall of the car, like someone had just stepped forward, but no one was visible. The doors closed, and the elevator began to move. It went up to the 5th floor, stopped for a few seconds, then came back down. When the doors opened again, the car was empty and the weight sensor read 0. The next morning, I told Luis what happened. He looked tired and said he'd already replaced the cameras and rewired the sensors. "If you're still seeing things," he said quietly, "it's not the system." I finished out the week and turned in my notice. I'd planned to quit that job eventually, but that was the final push. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, or maybe someone with building access screwing around. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that every time I walked through that lobby after, the elevator doors were watching me. About a month after I left, a friend who still worked there texted me a photo of the maintenance notice taped to the elevator. Apparently, they'd shut it down for good. "Unstable mechanics," the sign said. But when he sent me a screenshot of the new camera feed, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Even though the elevator had been sealed and powered off for a week, at 2:32 a.m., the indicator lights on the panel turned on by themselves. The weight sensor registered 63 kilograms. Then it went dark again. I moved into my first apartment 2 years ago after getting a new job. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building. The kind of place that smelled faintly of paint and dust no matter how often you cleaned. But it was quiet, affordable, and close to work, so I didn't complain. The building had 6 floors and maybe 20 units in total. Most of my neighbors were older, people who'd lived there for years. The walls were thick and I rarely heard anything from the other apartments, except for the occasional footsteps above me. For the first few months, I loved how peaceful it was. Then, one morning I found a folded piece of paper under my door. It was just a plain white note, no envelope, no handwriting on the outside. I assumed it was from management, maybe a maintenance notice. But when I unfolded it, there were only 5 words written in uneven handwriting. "Please stop moving the furniture." I frowned. I hadn't moved anything. I lived alone, and I barely had enough furniture to make noise even if I tried. The only sound I ever made was my TV, and I always kept it low. I figured maybe it was meant for someone else and slipped under my door by mistake. That evening, I went downstairs to the lobby to ask the superintendent, Mr. Walker, if he'd left it. He shook his head. "Probably just a mix-up," he said. "Some of the older tenants get confused about which apartment is which." I didn't think much of it after that. But 2 nights later, there was another note. Same folded paper, same handwriting. This time it said, "It's too loud at night." That one bothered me more. I didn't have guests, I didn't play music, and I was usually asleep by 11. I wondered if maybe the person below me was hearing the neighbors upstairs and assuming it was me. I decided to go introduce myself and clear it up. The apartment below mine belonged to an elderly woman named Mrs. Hartman. She must have been in her 70s. When she opened the door, she smiled politely but looked confused when I asked if she'd left me a note. "No, dear," she said. "I haven't heard a thing from you. You're a quiet one." I thanked her and went back upstairs, feeling uneasy. The next morning, there was another note. This one said, "You shouldn't stay here." I just stared at it for a while. It wasn't a complaint this time. It sounded like a warning. I showed it to Mr. Walker later that day, but he brushed it off. "Probably some prank from the kids who visit their grandparents," he said. "Don't let it bother you." I tried to believe that, but something about the handwriting felt deliberate. Shaky, but not random. Almost like someone had written it slowly on purpose. A few nights later, around 1 a.m., I was woken by a faint scraping sound near my door. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like paper sliding against the floor. I froze for a second, then turned on my lamp. I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway light was on, but there was no one outside. I waited a few seconds, then opened the door. Sure enough, there was another note on the floor. "Why did you ignore me?" That one actually made my hands shake. I checked both ends of the hallway, but it was empty. No footsteps, no doors closing, just silence. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept wondering how someone could have gotten that close without making a sound. I even placed a small shoe mat against the inside of my door the next night so I'd hear it move if someone tried slipping another note under. Nothing happened for a few days. Then just as I started to relax, it happened again. This time I was awake when I heard it. The faint scrape of paper sliding in. My heart was pounding. I waited until the sound stopped, then rushed to the door and pulled it open. The hallway was empty again. I looked down and saw the note lying half under the mat. It said, "You're in my room." That line sent a chill down my spine. It didn't make any sense. I'd lived there for months. This was my apartment. I checked the peephole again, the locks, even the windows. Everything was fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been standing just outside my door seconds earlier. The next morning, I told Mr. Walker again. This time, he looked concerned. "I'll check the hallway cameras," he said. "Maybe we'll catch who's doing this." The cameras were old analog types that recorded in black and white. The next evening, he showed me the footage. At around 12:58 a.m., someone approached my door. It was a tall figure wearing what looked like a long robe or coat. The image was grainy, but I could tell the person's head was bent forward, like they were looking at the floor. They stopped outside my door for about 10 seconds, crouched down, and slid something underneath. Then they stood up and turned toward the camera. Their face was completely obscured. It looked like they were wearing a hood, or maybe their hair was hanging over their face. But what stood out most was their posture. They stood unnaturally still for several seconds, then turned and walked down the hall, disappearing around the corner. Mr. Walker paused the footage. "You recognize that?" he asked. I shook my head. I didn't, and I didn't want to. He called the police that afternoon to report a trespasser, but by the time they came, there wasn't much they could do. The hallway door to the stairwell had no sign of forced entry, and all building keys were accounted for. They told me to keep my door locked and call 911 if it happened again. That night, I double-checked every lock in my apartment before bed. I even left a light on in the living room. Around 2:15 a.m., I woke to a soft tapping sound. It was coming from the other side of my door. 3 short knocks, then silence. I didn't move. I just sat there in bed listening. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. After a few seconds, there was another slow knock, like whoever it was trying to see if I was awake. Then, the sound of paper sliding under the door. I waited until it was quiet again, then crept out of bed and looked through the peephole. Nothing. I turned on the light, opened the door, and picked up the note. It said, "You moved my things." That was the last straw. I called the police right then and there. They came about 15 minutes later, searched the building, and checked the cameras again. No one was recorded entering the hallway this time. The footage showed my door, the timestamp, everything. Except the part where the note appeared. It was like the few seconds when it happened had been erased. The officers said to keep an eye out, but that it was probably a prank or someone with building access messing around. They offered to post extra patrols that week. I didn't stay to find out. I started packing the next morning. I figured I'd break my lease and take the loss. I just wanted out. But before I could finish packing, I found one last note. It wasn't under the door this time. It was taped to my bathroom mirror. I remember standing there for a good 30 seconds before I even had the nerve to read it. It said, "Thank you for giving it back." I left that night and stayed with a friend for a week before finding another place. When I finally came back to grab the last of my things, I ran into Mr. Walker in the hallway. He looked surprised to see me. "You heard about the leak, right?" he asked. Apparently, after I moved out, maintenance had to check behind the walls in my apartment because of a water leak. They found something sealed inside the drywall near the bathroom mirror. A small wooden box filled with old photographs, jewelry, and a few letters. The photos showed a young couple who used to live in the building decades ago. One of the letters was addressed to a woman with the same last name as Mrs. Hartman, the neighbor below me. Mr. Walker said the woman in the photos had gone missing in the late 1970s. No record of her leaving, no family contact. They assumed she'd moved away. The strange part? The handwriting on those letters matched the notes I'd been getting. I didn't ask for more details, I just nodded, signed the final papers, and left the building for good. It's been almost a year since then. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch myself glancing at the door to my apartment now, the one in my new place. And I swear, I still think I hear that faint sound. Paper sliding across the floor.